We have two people on the panel today, here for a limited time engagement only. First one up is Lindsay Bossert. She currently serves as Assistant Bridge Engineer for NDDOT. She oversees the bridge inspections, load rating, structural management, and preservation programs. She has a CE degree from NDSU, registered PE. She joined the Bridge Division in 2008, and she's also worked in the Bridge Hydraulics section and Bridge Design section. The guy over here with the long hair who's referred to as Jesus occasionally, his name is Leben. He works in local government division. He is currently the rural and environmental section lead. He's been with DOT for 15 years. He's worked in the construction pool prior to joining local government in 2010. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay. And I guess if you guys have questions along the way, please feel free to ask them as they come to you. And then there will be time at the end for questions as well. So, and some of you guys, there is some open seats up here. You don't have to stand. So come grab a seat. Lindsay?
Thanks, Brian. Okay, as Brian mentioned, my name is Lindsay Bossert. I currently oversee the bridge management section at the DOT. So our section is responsible for bridge inspection program, load ratings, management, and bridge preservation. And so today we're just going to dive into a few of those sections in a little more detail. The first one we're going to talk about is just our rules and regulations, the why behind we do everything that we do. So we're governed by the CFR section 650, which is what rules or what lists the National Bridge Inspection Program. The CFR also states we also have to maintain the bridge inventory. So every bridge in the state we have to keep inventory of and then submit our data annually to Federal Highway. There are currently some changes with this inventory. So the recording guide on the left came out in 1995. That's currently being phased out. The new requirement is called the Specifications for the National Bridge Inventory, otherwise known as the SNBI. So this came out March of 22, and we're required to have it fully implemented by the time we submit our data in 2028. So this sounds like a lot of time right now, but there are some significant changes with this new code. And so we are planning on doing some training in the upcoming dates for both owners as well as our bridge inspectors. The metrics for the oversight of the National Bridge Inspection Program is also known as the 23 metrics. So these are just 23 metrics that Federal Highway came up with as a way to document and evaluate the state on meeting the National Bridge Inspection Program. So every year, Federal Highway completes assessments of our metrics and determines our compliance level for each one of these metrics. The metrics are broken down into several different categories. They talk about our inspection organization as a whole, qualifications of personnel. This goes the program manager, load rating engineer, team leads for inspectors, and then also the inventory, certain requirements we have to meet for the inventory. The metrics also look at our inspection frequency, so they want to ensure that we are inspecting those bridges, the routine inspections, fracture critical and underwater, as required in the CFR. And then lastly, it looks at just our procedures for our inspections. And so they look at, the quality of inspection, our critical findings procedures, load rating, scour. So if Federal Highway determines that we're not compliant with one of the metrics, they can issue a plan of corrective action. And so one of the plan of corrective actions is our load rating. We're going to talk about that in a few slides. And then the other plan of corrective actions that's sitting out there is our scour metric. So now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into our bridge inspection. So in 2019, the DOT went through a major overhaul to centralize the bridge inspections. So after that change, the structural management section as it currently sits today consists of 3 engineers are in charge of bridge inspections, load rating, and then our data management engineer. And then we have 4 full-time dedicated state bridge inspectors that are DOT employees that strictly inspect the state system. So those 4 individuals are broken up into 2 different teams, one on the west side of the state, one on the east. Just due to the number of state structures that we have, we also have to rely on a consultant to help us inspect the remainder of our state structures. And then all of our local system is currently being inspected by consultants. So this is just a breakdown of how our different teams look. The map on the left side is the state system. So the red is our west team, the blue is our east team, and then the green dots are our consultant inspectors on the state system. And then on the right-hand side is our local regions. So we split the state into 4 separate regions, and each consultant has been given a region to complete those local inspections. Just to give an idea of how many inspections were completed in 22, the state consultant did 80 of our inspections, the DOT teams did a total of 649, and then the local bridge consultants did 1,354. So these routine inspections typically need to be done once every 24 months. So the inspectors go out to the site roughly, every other year. It seems like every year we have our own set of unique challenges during inspection. In 22, we dealt with some flooding. So with flooding, we get washouts as shown in the bottom left-hand picture. These, need to be dealt with critical findings, close the bridge until that washout is fixed. The flooding also creates issues just with high water. So when our inspectors go out there and the high water is present, they're unable to inspect, the superstructure, substructure. So what we require them to do is inspect what they can in the month that's required for the inspection, and then they typically go back out there once the water is receded to inspect the remaining bridge. So our inspectors use an application called InspectX. This is just a software that collects the inspection data and then feeds into our bridge management system. So InspectX is relatively simple to use. There's an office module and a field module that you can use. And it stores all the inspection reports as well as maintenance tasks that are identified by our inspectors. So the bridge owner is able to access their bridges in InspectX. We do have to limit the number of logins on InspectX, so we try and limit the counties to have 1 or 2 logins per county. But if any counties are here and currently don't have access to InspectX, feel free to reach out to Brian or myself and we can help get you guys set up so you can see your bridges. So our inspectors go out and use this NBI component rating. So federal highway mandates that we use this component rating for each inspection. This is just a scale from 0 to 9, with 9 being the best, and it just gives an overall assessment of the main components of the structure. So the main components that we look at are the deck, super, and sub if it's a bridge, and then we look at a culvert if it's a culvert. Another thing to note, the controlling NBI, so the lowest NBI rating of any of the deck, sub, super is what the overall bridge condition is given. So in this case, since the deck is the lowest, it's in a fair category, the entire bridge condition would be considered fair. It's also important to note a poor bridge doesn't equal a dangerous bridge. It's a bridge that's in need of a structural improvement. And a poor bridge is considered poor if any of the components is rated poor. So a lot of our bridges, our deck may be poor, but the super and sub are still in fair condition, but the overall rating is still considered a poor. So on top of the NBI data, we also collect element level data. The element conditions just help give us more detail into what is deteriorating versus just a single number that we talked about in the NBI. So this can be extremely useful when we're working with bridge management, trying to forecast our bridge conditions and planning future projects. These elements are rated on condition states from 1 to 4. And just to make things extra complicated, the elements are done opposite of NBI, so condition state 1 is the best, and then as it goes up, it gets worse into the severe category. So this is just an example out of InspectX that shows how the pier and the abutment both have separate elements, and their defects or their condition states can be coded separately. So where in NBI we would have just been given a single digit, here we get a little more information. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about load rating. Load rating is just the determination of the live load carrying capacity of an existing bridge, and it's defined by this equation here. A lot of people ask why we load rate. First we want to prevent this from happening. So safety is obviously our #1 priority. We want to ensure the traveling public is safe at our bridge crossings. Load rating helps us determine what those load postings requirements are if needed. And then we also can use load rating to process overload permits on the state system and provide input for rehab and replacement decisions. So now, there's several different events in the life of a bridge that will require a load rating. And ideally, the initial load rating should be completed during the design phase. The load rating engineer should work closely with the designer so that the initial load rating is consistent with the design calcs. Then the load rating can be updated during construction, when you receive shop drawings, if anything changed, or in the field. If there were ever changes made, you should update the load rating at that time. And then after construction, anytime the load rating needs to be redone is if the load carrying would be affected. So this can happen if we have changes in the dead load. If you do an overlay or add overburden, you would want to redo the load rating, or changes in condition. So if you have deterioration, section loss, or what we see a lot is when our bridges get hit and we lose strands in the beams. And then lastly, if we ever have changes in federal or state regulations, if they introduce new vehicles, it would trigger reload rating our bridges at that time. So as I mentioned, we did have a plan of corrective action, or a PCA. We did just complete this December of 22. And so what that PCA required is that all state and local bridges have to be rated according to the Manual of Bridge Evaluation. And then all of the AASHTO legal vehicles and special hauling vehicles needed to be included in that rating. So this PCA was a huge effort, both by DOT staff as well as our consultants, just to give an idea of how many load ratings we've completed over these past couple of years. You can see that there's been a significant increase in 21 and 22. And then I'm just going to go through, this is our load rating summary sheet. I'm sure a lot of bridge owners have seen these come out. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but on the left-hand side are just all the different vehicles that we have to load rate for. And then if you look here in this rectangle, you want to look at the rating factor. If it's ever less than 1, it requires a posting. And then whatever the lowest posting ton is on this column right here is going to be your controlling post. So in this example, since 11 is the lowest number, that's what our controlling post is. And then one other thing we want to note on this sheet, we call out, the mode and member. So this is why the bridge is failing at this location, or where the controlling point is for that load rating. One thing to note, even though we call out a specific member, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only part of the bridge that's having issues. So just if you are, as a bridge owner, trying to do a rehab project, make sure an engineer re-looks at that load rating to make sure that your rehab project is giving you what you want. Okay, so lastly, we are going to talk about bridge conditions. One thing to note, bridge conditions are ever changing. What I'm showing today is just a snapshot in time. And we have to try and manage our bridge network and the deterioration with preservation, rehab, and replacement. So the DOT currently manages a total of 49 bridges. These charts just break it down into good, fair, poor based on that NBI component that we talked about earlier. You can see the state has roughly 1745. In this chart, each bridge is worth the same. No matter the size of the bridge, it's all just considered one. So we have roughly 3% poor, 46% fair, and 51% good. The non-state side, so when we say non-state, most of this is county bridges, but it also includes city bridges and railroads. And so again, they have roughly 14% poor, 44% fair, or 42% good. So another way that we sometimes look at the bridge condition by deck area. This really helps us determine what our funding needs are and how to manage the system. So this is just split up, same chart, but it's by deck area. So as you can see, the previous slide, this non-state counted for almost double the number of bridges on the state, but once we switch it to deck area, the state does have more deck area of bridges. So this changes the numbers slightly, 2% poor on the state and down to 9% poor on the non-state side. We also look at the age of the structure to help us plan for future funding and to help anticipate our needs. So this graph is just the number of bridges that were built in each decade on the state system. So you can see the large number of bridges that happened during the interstate era, and that most of these bridges are in the fair category. So we always try to manage these fair bridges with rehab or preservation to try and eliminate them from all moving to poor at the exact same time. Then this is the same chart on the non-state side. So bridges built in each decade. You can see here on the non-state, there are significantly older bridges on this system, and that they're all, slowly deteriorating over time. So then lastly, what I want to talk about is just a reminder that we have this bridge view out on our website. So this bridge view contains most of the information that I've shared with you today. If you go out to the DOT's website, under the GIS, there's a bridge view tab. So this first one that pulls up when you first click on it just has every bridge in our state and then their condition. So then you can click on an actual node here. So I just zoomed in and clicked on this one, and it gives you a little bit of the inventory data, and then as well as it will give you the conditions. You can also go through all the tabs on the top part. We've tried to break it down into useful information. So we have a poor bridges, posted and closed bridges, age, that sort of thing. The nice thing about all these tabs is you can also filter it on your own. And so if you are a specific county that wants to see how many poor bridges you have in your county, you're able to just filter it up at the top there. And then the last tab is just the dashboard. So again, this is just a real easy way to see what the current conditions are of the bridge. And this is filterable as well. So that is all I have now, and I'm going to turn it over to Ken.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hello. I'm Ken Leben. I work for in our local government division. I know a lot of you in the room here. I work primarily on our county projects, and a lot of that has been, especially recently, the county bridge program. So I'm just going to kind of talk about, well, it's no surprise to anyone here that the problem we're looking at is we can't get reinforced concrete box culverts delivered in a reasonable amount of time so that we could build projects when we have them programmed. There's a lot of causes to this. I think probably the biggest one is the increased demand out there for boxes. There's supply chain issues, and we've seen, even starting last year, it's been delaying projects. So, projects we had planned for construction in 2022 are getting pushed out to 23. And what we're looking at is what are things we can do so that the project gets built in the year we have it planned for construction. Because at least for our bigger federal aid projects, Federal Highway has something they call the inactive project list. So let's say we bid a project in spring of 2022 and we award it to the contractor, but if they don't charge anything for 6 months, it gets on the inactive project list, and Federal Highway starts asking DOT, why is this project that you've encumbered $1 million on not being billed to? And if over a certain percentage of projects get on that inactive project list, I think it's 2%, then we get elevated and we have to start reporting more often on that. We don't want to do that, so that's one of the reasons. Also, it doesn't make sense for us to be bidding projects in 2022, or 2023 now, sorry, knowing there's no way they're going to get bid until 2024, because it just, it creates all sorts of problems for us. Like then we may end up projects we want in 24 aren't going to get bid till later. Anyway, you guys all get it. So what is the solution? So we need to think outside the box. In this case, the reinforced concrete box culvert. I was hoping for laughs. So before we move on to alternatives, like obviously we know that reinforced concrete box culverts, there's high demand for them because they work well, they last a long time, they have good design life, and we're from our perspective, they're still going to be the best option on state highways, on our paved county major collectors, anywhere there's a high volume. What I guess I'm encouraging people to look at today is on our lower volume routes, our county off-system routes, where there's less risk, less traffic, looking at alternatives. One thing we can look at, instead of putting a box culvert in, multiple round pipe. Doesn't always work hydraulically, obviously. We have been hearing, at least recently from the Corps, they're expecting us to match the full width of the stream channel. A lot of these county roads were built, they have a small box, stream channel widens out. This may be one option for that. Cost may or may not be that much different than a box culvert, but I think the supply issues are somewhat alleviated if you go to round pipe. Obviously there's issues with all of these things, the end sections on these, if you use mitered end sections or put in wing walls or what, but those are all things we can figure out. Another option that I think we're going to push a little harder for is we want people to start looking at other types of boxes, whether they're aluminum box culverts, structural plate pipe, things like that. This picture here, an example, this is somewhere on a county road in Montana up by Malmstrom Air Force Base. So the Department of Defense was doing one of their missile road graveling projects. And the year it was going to construction, they had a pipe get damaged by spring flooding. So they change ordered an aluminum box culvert on to replace that pipe and had it delivered in 4 weeks. And had it installed and built, and this was in construction in 2019, I believe. Everything we've heard is it's working fine. Talking to the folks that did it, one of the advantages they have is that it comes in pieces. You can install everything with a backhoe. But one of the critical things with aluminum box culverts, there's a limit on how much fill you can put on top of them, obviously. And you can see here on the side, the backfill and getting compaction on that is critical. So with a concrete box culvert, it's obviously you need to have good fill installed correctly, but for these to perform properly, that's a critical thing. But one thing we've heard is that local forces can install these themselves. It shows up in pieces on a truck. You don't need a crane, and they seem to work. Another thing we're want to look at, obviously in places where you may have the higher fill requirement, this is a structural plate pipe at the bottom of a 100-foot hole up by Mandaree. This is an oil field road, I believe they put in. So you couldn't, they looked at box culverts, but getting it down there, they were more limited by the accessibility of the site, and that's why they pushed towards this option. But that's one thing we'd also like to see people look at. I know there's been there are, and I understand, concerns about metal pipe. Most manufacturers have the ability to thicken the gauge on the bottom sections of that if you're concerned about, because obviously that's where it's going to go bad first. Same concerns too about backfilling. You got to make sure that we get good compaction up under the haunches, but there are options out there that can be done. Another thing, and this is just a picture can't remember, I think this is actually in Missouri, but there's a concrete slab under that aluminum box. That eliminates a lot of the concerns with that bottom getting washed out. It's still something you can do where you don't need a bridge contractor. Anybody can pour a flat slab, bolt it up, and it kind of cures the concern we have with open bottom boxes as it relates to scour. We've been pretty hesitant in the state to build any open bottom structures, particularly with federal aid, because of we don't want structures that are, as soon as we build them, scour critical. So this is one way to do that if people are hesitant, or if you have hot soils or something, where you could put a concrete invert in there and then bolt the aluminum box culvert to it. We have a pretty big increase in the amount of federal aid available. Our DOT management has made the decision, because some of the slides Lindsay showed, the number of core structures on the local system as it relates to the total. So our county bridge program has increased from about $8 million a year to around $30 million a So we're going to be replacing a lot of county bridges. We're already seeing projects where this spring we were not getting bidders. There's a lot of factors to that, but we need to broaden what we're looking at so we can get more contractors involved, because our bridge contractors are full. So these are things we're looking at. Some of the issues, we do need all of our structures load rated. So when a consultant or a county turns in their bridge plans, we need it load rated, we need the model. We don't currently do any load rating on aluminum box culverts, but I think those are issues we can work through. Talking to manufacturers, other states put it in plans. So when you bid it, we specify that the manufacturer needs to provide the load rating and model. That's one way we can do it, or we can work with our consultants. And I know a lot of you guys are smart, we can figure it out. Inward options like I talked about, we can do concrete, thicker gauge. We also, there's going to be some issues with how we bid these as far as specs, but I think those are all things we can figure out. One thing I did want to talk about with the increasing federal bridge funds is we've, in the past, on local projects, the DOT has never paid for preliminary engineering, so we put that on the counties. Now we can pay for preliminary engineering because we have the funds available to do it. So it's going to cost more money to have a consultant go out and look at a bunch of different options. I think we're okay with that. Like we have the money, we can do it. We want to get these projects bid. We want to get these pour and closed and load rated bridges off our system so that red box goes down. Yeah. The other thing I have in there, guardrail, obviously I just kind of focused on box culverts. There's a ton of different structure types out there, primarily on these low volume roads because of the design we're using for the roads. Like you can get away with the box, but there's lots of different bridge options if you can do. If you're a county that is okay with having guardrail out there, but that's something we obviously need to have crash tested guardrail and end sections on everything we build with federal money. So, coming off of the governor's speech, I want to talk a little bit about gratitude. Mainly what I want to say is, obviously I work for the DOT, there's a lot of DOT folks in here, but we couldn't do what we do without the counties we work with and their consultants. And we're kind of all in this together, and I want to say thanks for the hard work you guys put in. I know a lot of times if I say something, it causes a lot of people to have to work overtime or work their weekends and stuff like that. So just want to say I appreciate that. And that's all I have. If you have any questions, we can try to answer them.
Yeah, we've got smart guy in the back.
So, Ken, you mentioned a little bit, we're all aware of the supply issues, but we also struggle a lot with just getting contractors to bid, as you mentioned, and when they are bidding, potentially if it's a smaller job up in, county, township, prices are super high. You mentioned, one of the things we keep hearing from contractors is flexibility on the dates and extending the timelines, but obviously that gets you guys into some problems. Is there some middle ground there or something we can do in your guys' eyes that's best practice to try to find some common ground so that we can get more people to bid it?
I think, Brian might have some thoughts. One thing we've talked about is we've sort of tried to brush to bid everything in the spring for construction that year, or we bid it in November for construction the following year. I think what we're going to look at is trying to bid more projects in the summer and early fall with the intent to have the completion date the following year, so that because they can work through the winter if there are things they need to do, clearing, grubbing, if there's bats, there are issues with long-eared bats or anything. But I don't really know anything to add.
Yeah. What we're also going to be doing is asking local agencies if they have, we know they're going to have to be bid openings in the springtime. So that's when the projects, we're going to make sure that they have alternatives in those projects. If they want to bid a box culvert, that's fine, but we need an alternative to a box culvert, and still keep that completion date that current year, that fall. So like anything bid this spring, we're looking at, if you want a box culvert, you need to add some type of other alternative that could be built by this fall. We need to get those projects done. We can't keep them open a year and a half, 2 years, like Ken said, without some type of activity. You know, so if you're looking at a box culvert and it's like a higher volume route, you know, those are the projects we're looking at. Maybe you want to do late summer, very early fall, so those can be supplied the following year, and we should be okay that way. So we're looking at doing a number of different things. We're open to options. Again, it's up to the owner and the consultant that they're working with on those options, but as Ken said, you know, we are paying for PE now, so we are we're going to be dictating a little bit more on what's going to be put in the plans. I mean, we are funding the brunt, or most of the money, or all of the money in these off-system bridges. We're looking for options to get things done, because if they're open too long, Federal Highway could take those funds back, and we have an open contract on it. That's something we don't want to do, so we need your help in designing alternatives and putting things together that other contractors can bid. You know, we do have a lot of projects that have multiple bridges on them as well. You know, so there may be cases where maybe in this site you can use an alternative design that they can build this year, finish it up the following year with a box. You know, we're open to have those discussions with everybody. So, anything else, Jeremy? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So as far as the counties and you guys getting more Fed money to pay for preliminaries, that's something then that the county just has to ask when they're, you know, presenting if they want to put in a box or whatever?
I'll let Kent answer that.
So we did just, so any projects, we've selected projects for 2023, 24, and 25, and 26 now. So that when the counties are notified what the project number and PCN is and the bid year, we also said if you want to use federal aid for PE, preliminary engineering, just let us know, because then you have to follow the federal aid process, hold interviews to hire a consultant. Yep. So, yeah, basically it's available on any federal aid bridge project that comes through us now. And off-system bridges, so anything not on a federal aid route, we're paying 100% federal aid for, because the bill says we have to, PE, construction, and construction engineering. And then on-system structures are still the 80-20 split.
Any other questions?
You guys were talking about the alternatives for structures and mostly the off-system. What about on-system? Is there going to be any bid alternatives for those? Because those are going to run into the same scheduling issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking at all options, and it comes down to, I guess, a comfort level. If the counties are willing to try other structures on their on-system routes, we don't have any issues with that. I think we've heard some hesitancy about counties moving away from boxes under paved roads, or under concrete boxes. I know Nick West up in Grand Forks County is planning to do 4 or 5 structures that they're going to do locally, and he's got quotes on concrete boxes and quotes on aluminum boxes, and I think he's ready to pull the trigger on aluminum boxes. So maybe once we get some out there, like there's a little experience, they'll be a little better. But yeah, I don't think we're going to be requiring an on-road system. If the county says they want to have a concrete box culvert, you know, we'll let you bid that. But what we don't want to do is bid a project in the spring with spring 2023, knowing the completion date is in 24, and that's not going to get built, then we'll just wait and bid that later in the year.
Well, we have a number that are structural plate pipes currently on the system, on the on-state system, which traditionally are going to be replaced with a box culvert. So I was just wondering if that's going to be the alternatives for those type of structures.
The state system? Yeah, that's good. Well, one of the reasons too is we know that we're pushing for off-system stuff to use alternatives is that there is a limited manufacturing capacity for concrete box culverts. We're still going to be using those. We want to make those available for our higher volume routes. So to take a little pressure off of that, we're looking at options for off-system. There may be a case, I know we've had a couple of state highway projects, and stop me if I get out of line here, but where we bid a precast and cast in place option, thinking that would get us some, but I don't think they got any cast in place options anyway. So And that comes down to contractor availability more than anything, I guess, where you're at in the state. But I know they're looking at other options because they run in the same problem on the state system, but I'm focusing more on the county side. Anything I said where we're going to require stuff, I'm talking about local government, federal and county bridge projects.
Yeah, and I think on system or state system, I think we are looking at other options as well, because we know we need to move projects as well and get some of our stuff replaced on the state system as well. So I'm not sure what we've come to for that, but we are looking at other options on the state system as well.
Yes.
So are there any options to increase capacity to create these boxes?
Well, right now, Dale Schwint with Rinker is talking in the main hall about the problems that contractors and manufacturers have been having. I know he said he's been pressuring his people up the chain where he works to bring in a facility.
Yeah, I think Elk River over in Minnesota, they're building a structure for indoor so they can do it year round. I know Dale's trying to get that here, but as far as we know, he hasn't convinced them yet to do that here at Minokan, do year-round stuff. So, but yeah, some of them are moving to that, just not in our immediate area yet.
And the problem becomes with concrete boxes, it gets pretty cost prohibitive to ship them long distances. So if I know Rapid City, I think a new plant expanded down there, opened up down there, but they're really only competitive in southwest corner of the state right now.
I think a 500-mile radius roughly, is that what it was, John?
So I know they're looking at it, and I think the demand, we're not alone. The infrastructure bill had an increase in bridge funding for every state in the country. So every state, I think, is looking at similar issues as far as shortage of materials to get some.
Yeah, sorry, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, have you guys thought about, for instance, or is it possible for alternatives, if we had a cast in place alternative, I don't know how that's worked for you guys, maybe not that great, have different completion dates? Like, we want it really done in the fall of '24. We'll put this out there for a cast, for different alternatives, but I mean, we really want to expect, we're going to wait another year for a precast. And maybe all these alternatives, because it's something that helps us at all. I mean, I'd rather have the precast concrete box culvert than just doing a layer, so it's probably going to be.
Yeah, I think the last cast in place that we just bid recently in the state system, we didn't get any bidders on the cast in place.
I mean, does that help any sort of, make any sense to allow different completion dates depending on what you're choosing? You have alternatives with different completion dates. I guess what I'm asking.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess at this point, I think we're willing to try anything reasonable. I don't know though if you're going to get any bids. Like if you have a precast box with a completion date 2024 or a cast in place for 23, I don't think anybody's going to bid on the
Either way.
Yeah, and maybe not either way, but you know, it feels like if we have these far out completion dates, we're kind of just kicking the can. We know the contractors are busy. They may be bidding jobs they're not going to get to in 24. We don't, you know, that's the further out we get with contracted work, the more risk I think there is. You know, you're introducing a lot of variables that we can't account for, especially with the amount of work out there. So, and you know, anybody that deals on the construction side of things, like whatever is a priority today is a priority. So something that's 2 years out, it's a priority in 2 years. So that's kind of where our concern comes in with that. But to your question, yeah, I think we're willing to look at lots of options. So. Yes, sir. Oh, did you point at something?
I pointed at Paul.
Paul can wait. Yeah.
Has anybody bid anything where they give the contractor the option to build what they want? They just say like it has to be hydraulically able to handle this much and it has to be pass load rating?
No, but like more of almost a design build type thing.
Kind of, yeah.
I don't know that I know we haven't done anything like that. I think we would consider it, right? There's no reason why we can't do that, is there?
Well, we could look at it to see, depending on how things are put together, so it's not an actually design build, because by state law, we can't do design build yet. But there might be something we could do to maybe give options or something that, to make it work. So like Kent said, if we're willing to listen to see what somebody's got to make things go.
Yeah, basically I have the, hydraulic capacity, meet the load rating requirements, and then, I know in the past we've done stuff with like riprap alternatives where we list some approved equals or list some actual products or approved equals and basically put it on the.
I feel like a lot of these newer technologies are more or less single source kind of type
And that,
items.
and that used to be an issue. Federal Highway in 2019, they changed the rules so we can sole source products. So if there's a specific manufacturer you want to use, we can bid that. But, I mean, we can also, I think we're open to trying lots of different options. Paul?
Oh, can you talk a little bit about funding opportunities and partnerships with historic bridge programs?
Sure. So as part of the new infrastructure bill, our DOT management did decide to use some of that money for historic bridge rehabilitation, the historic bridge rehabilitation program. So we did, in the last 2 rounds of applications, there were probably 4 or 5 bridges, 4. We are currently working through getting the historic bridge rehab committee set up, and then we'll figure out where we can fund those bridges. So that's going to be with us, the DOT, North Dakota State Historic Preservation Officer, and
Yeah, we got a few on the committee, Paul. What we're waiting for, we had 3 the first round, but management did not sign off on the policy until recently. So when we did our second round, we had 1 more bridge that was put in for historic rehab. So what we did is we went back to those applicants and owners and we asked for additional information, a little bit more in-depth scope of work. So we get the committee together to determine whether or not, depending on what the scope of the work is, if the bridge would remain historic if funded, and then also to select any of those bridges that we would want to fund. That's kind of where we're at right now, Paul. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
And just to kind of, if anybody's not familiar with that program, we've done, I don't know, maybe half a dozen of them in the past. Essentially, if a local agency, the city or county, has a bridge that they want to keep, most of them are through trusses. It's very hard to increase the load carrying capacity, but we can go and basically pull the bridge off the abutments, strip it down, rebuild it, repaint it. We get a brand new 110-year-old steel truss bridge. So, but maintaining structural integrity is one of the key components of that. So a lot of times people think we can come in and add beams and do a lot of things to make it handle modern traffic loads, and that is difficult. To maintain the structural or the historic integrity of the bridge while increasing the load carrying capacity. So.
Okay,
Yeah, Jamie.
I was just curious if Paul was going to be on the committee.
Yeah, we got somebody on the committee and Bridges on the committee, so we have several plus SHPO.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Probably one more question, and can it be for Lindsay? She's feeling left out. Lindsay, you can pick whoever you want.
I got one on Inspectex with what we're seeing on a few of our bridges, where if you look at the maintenance list for when it comes back, they'll tell you basically bridge and markers, which is about 90% of our bridges, and then plank. But if you go through the actual inspection report, it's coming back with scour issues and things like that. So there's kind of a cross disconnect where my bridge guys are only looking at, well, this is what the maintenance report says we should do, but they're missing the scours and that stuff. So trying to get them to do both. Is there any way to make sure that all those criticals are getting put to the maintenance report, so we run those, they're focusing on?
Sure, yeah, we can talk about it with our inspectors. So a lot of the defects are coded in the actual inspection, and then the maintenance are the items that the inspectors have identified that should be fixed. So it's still a process ensuring that they get all those moved over. But if you ever notice it, feel free to reach out to Brian and we can take a closer look at those.
Yep, and we do have some of our inspectors are in the room, so they're here.
I was going to call them out.
So. I didn't.
Yeah, we'd love to talk about it. We welcome all questions, so.
Take a look at our caps too, so I don't get a bridge deck and then come back and have to do the cap the next year. Those are.
Do we have one more? Do we have one other question in the back?
Yeah, so my question was about, I'm sorry, I kind of came to your presentation a little late. So NDI and NDE ratings, are you required to do both now in North Dakota?
So the element level are only required on the NHS system. However, we do them on all of our bridges, state and local, we do code.
Because I looked at that NDE development, it's highly dependent on inspectors, really, how they feel, what experiences they have, it's purely visual. Have you faced any challenges in that area, like having two different inspectors coming up with two completely different NDE ratings on a certain bridge?
Yeah, you know, we always talk about consistency with our inspections, and no matter what team, we want to ensure that we're getting the same answer or close to. So there is a little give that inspectors are allowed to code. And so it's part of our QC/QA process to help ensure that we have a third party come in and look at those inspections and make sure that they're agreeing with what the inspectors are seeing out in the field. But I do think it's a never-ending process, and I think we'll continue to get better. Our inspections, you know, this process is really only 3 years old, so we've made it through 1 2-year cycle, so every bridge has now been inspected at least once. And so now we're really starting to see some of those consistencies and take another trip back out there, so.
Thank you.
All right, I think that's about all the time we have. So next up on the list is lunch, back where you came from. So let's give Lindsay and Kent a hand.